having had the opportunity to actually handle original documents by Leonardo da Vinci. And it was his first visit back to Europe after having fled Vienna in 1938. And he spoke about it in reverential terms. This was a religious experience. But what he was handling were human-created documents, but their documents that had ideas that changed the world, and that was of what was of profound importance. And so at a very early age, my parents gave me all these enrichment toys, and I remember inventorying them and cataloging them and putting them in, organizing them by different shapes and sizes and capabilities. And I went through the neighborhood. We don't let 5-year-olds do that anymore, but I went out myself and gathered different kinds of objects, called radios and bicycles, and took them apart and added to my collection. And I had this idea, if I put these things together in just the right way, I could create transcendent effects. Didn't have that vocabulary until maybe a few years ago. But I can remember the feeling is, wow, just, if I could really put these together the right way, I could do anything. I could solve any problem. And I decided I would be an inventor. That was the idea. And I always had this conceit, I know what I'm going to be. Other kids were wondering, I'm going to be teacher, doctor, garbage man. I knew what I was going to be. And I started actually doing projects, putting things together. It didn't work out that well at 5 or 6. At 8, I actually created Ramona and a mechanical puppet theater. And I could command the world. I had a command station with mechanical linkages, and I could move on and off stage the sun and the moon, the trees and people, and move their limbs. And I could control the world from a command station. It was virtual reality with mechanical technology. That was the first invention that I actually showed to anybody besides myself. And one project led to another. So I'm still doing those projects. But that's kind of the origin.
Okay. So in our family, we tend to draw from previous generations. I'm wondering how you feel about sort of different generations' attitudes towards technology. Like I can remember, I'm only 25, but there was a time when not everyone carried a cell phone. But that's even more profound for your generation. What are your thoughts on how the different generations should engage with the singularity?
Well, it's really interesting because I do present to lots of different groups, and there are different age groups and different professions and all around the world. It's actually the youngest people that are the most open to these observations that information technology is progressing exponentially, and therefore there's accelerating change. I presented this not too long ago to middle school kids. This is the generation that you teach. And they were very enthusiastic and coming up to me later and saying, oh yeah, I remember that, things were so different when I was 8. And certainly there are exceptions. I have many contemporaries who are enthusiastic contributors to thinking about the singularity, but remarkably, a lot of people in their 50s and 60s who have really seen a lot of change, because when we were kids, there was no internet, there were no computers, there was no cell phones, there was no way to communicate other than expensive long-distance calls. But people very quickly adopt to the current reality, kind of just make a mental assumption that that's the way things always were, even though they know it's not the case, and think that's the way it always will be. Well, maybe cell phones will get a little smaller. And very often find resistance to breaking away from linear thinking to exponential thinking among the older populations. But I will say in general, some people understand it in all generations. I've been actually thinking about this. Why do some people very quickly accept the idea of what I call the law of accelerating returns, the profound impact and implications of exponential change in information technology. And some people just don't. They just can't break away from linear thinking. It's not intelligence. It's not education. I've had, significant problems with Nobel Prize winners, and then some kid from South Bronx will really get it. So, but in general, I would say the younger generation is more open-minded.
Yeah, I would agree with that. My students are often talking about sort of making relationships online. This is kind of like something that I think my generation, we didn't even do as much. We would talk with our friends that we knew in real life online. But my kids now talk about how they have a friend on the internet who lives in Japan, they've never seen them, and this is totally normal. So I'm wondering, the next step of that is obviously starting to have relationships with non-biological people and starting to, sort of create our own non-biological children, maybe in a sense. And I'm wondering, how do you reconcile sort of your biological progeny, like me, with a vision of creating this non-biological intelligence? Like, is there a difference in that relationship? Do you see there being a difference?
Well, it's been really cool having biological children. I have another one sitting right there who is responsible for the first grandchild in the family. And we're not at human level intelligence yet. We're not creating people in software. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of my thesis is that we will get there not too long from now. I'm saying 2029. By 2030 is this will really get kind of rolling. Although, as I say that, I would disagree with that. There's actually one more controversial thing. The idea of living indefinitely, people actually find that more disturbing. I say, oh, we'll have computers that are as smart as people. People don't we have that already? But you talk about radical life extension, that gets people upset. And I think it will be radical to have something equivalent to a person. And in my new book that you mentioned about the mind, I talk a lot about the nature of consciousness and free will and identity, and is it necessarily tied to a biological substrate? What does it mean to have a person who's non-biological? What are the moral implications? Because I think morality is based on the idea of consciousness. But I think we will adapt to it. When it happens, it will be part of everyday reality. I mean, I wrote about things that we have today, like the internet. People thought it was totally crazy. But now that it's here, it's like everyday reality. We get used to changes very quickly. I think that the ultimate implication, though, is we're going to merge with these intelligent machines. We've taken the first baby steps in that. I mean, I'm smarter than I used to be because I have just Wikipedia and search engines, and I can access all of human knowledge in a few seconds. And as I write these books, my productivity and ability to find the right ideas is so much enhanced. And I'm using conventional tools by today's standards. Ultimately, these technologies will go inside our bodies and brains, or we'll put brain extenders in our mind that will in fact connect to the cloud. We're going to expand the size and scope of our neocortex. So there's not going to be a clear distinction between, biological people on the left side of the room and non-biological on the right. It's going to be all mixed up, as it is now. I think it's very encouraging that these technologies are very widely distributed. It's not like the AI is just in some, black laboratories by the intelligence agencies. There's 6 billion cell phones. There's 1 billion smartphones. It's very widely distributed. And one of the reasons we call it the singularity is to borrow this metaphor from physics, where it's hard to see beyond the event horizon because it's so profoundly different. And you brought up, I think, the key issue that's really hard to wrap our mental arms around. So I've tried to do that in my books. But I think we'll get used to it. And it will be a profound benefit. I mean, right now, for example, we can't back up our mind file. And people were shocked 50 years from now. You mean people went around in 2012 without backing up their mind file? How could they do that?
Shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to ask you about your, well, being a writer. I sort of feel like language is kind of our first technology. And you know, you've been involved with so many sophisticated technologies, and now you're coming back to writing fiction. Why fiction?
Well, you're right. Language was our first technology. Spoken language was our first technology, so that we could tell stories. Someone would have an experience, and they could preserve that experience by telling a story. And then there were storytellers. They would learn these stories and pass them down from generation to generation. Then we realized our memories were limited, so we invented written language and libraries and so on. I think language is actually very powerful. Alan Turing came up with this test to assess whether or not a computer is operating at human levels, and it's based on written language. You have a human judge interview the AI, the computer, and a human, or maybe several of each, over what he called teletype lines, basically instant messaging, so the judge can't see who he or she is interviewing. And it's all by basically natural language communication. And the implication is, and this has kind of stood the test of time, it's considered the definitive test for human level intelligence. My contention is that computers will pass that by 2029. And it's based on human language, so the implication is that human language embodies all of our intelligence. And as I write this novel, which you're helping me with, right?
Some might do this.
It feels just like a technology project, because I'm creating a virtual world, but through words. And you feel almost godlike in that you're creating people. And these people can be very real. I mean, think of the famous novels that you've read, and the characters are very real to us. Told just in written language. So it is a very powerful technology. And I've been interested in virtual reality for a long time, and there's another way to do it.
Another virtual world. It's a good segue into one of my last questions, which is, what have you learned from me?
Well, one is show not tell,
Writing.
which is a writing tip. So you don't tell Danielle was angry. You actually show her angry, and the audience will get, okay, she's angry. And that's much more powerful. I'm now on draft 5 of Danielle. Danielle is about my daughter. Inspired by this one, but and also by my other progeny.
I think Danielle is also kind of a female version of you.
There's some of me in
If I do say so.
I'm dad in the novel, but there's probably more of me and Danielle than dad.
Yeah.
Danielle's a superheroine, so it's a girl power book. She doesn't melt steel with her eyes, she melts problems with her intellect. And she's a very, very precocious. So another thing you taught me was to provide her with character flaws. She's a human being, and she has difficulties, for example, relating to her peers. That's one thing she's kind of off-putting. And she struggles with that. She finally makes a friend, but the friend is very hard to get to. It requires several plane rides to Africa, and then a 2-day mule ride through the jungle to get to this friend.
She struggles with pillow fights, if I remember.
Well, yeah, she fails in her first pillow fight, but she redeems herself. You haven't
I haven't gotten there.
But I'm now on draft 5. I think I found my voice with your help. So you've helped me a lot with fiction. Of course, that's her cover for the novel, in the graphic novel style. And I think you've inspired me to see you really following your own path. And you really have a confidence in what you're trying to do and the path you want to take. And sometimes mom is nervous about it, and how's this going to work? But you have a vision and a passion for what you're doing, and it is actually working out brilliantly. So you very much are your own person. And I think you're also following this philosophy I inherited of the power of ideas.
Okay, I'm not going to give you any help with this one. What do you think I've learned from you?
The idea of sticking to your ideas, even if they don't make sense to other people. And so really rigorously following your passion and your own path, which can involve some risk and some exploration, and not necessarily taking the easy paths of, there are various professions that you can just, you study 4 years and you get this credential and you practice this craft. That's not been the direction we've followed. You really have to pioneer the direction. Graphic novels, for example, is kind of a pioneering area. It's an emerging area. It takes some courage to pursue that. And I think you've learned that from me. I mean, I've followed my passion. Some of the ideas did not make sense to a lot of people at first. You have to have courage. There's no point doing anything if it's not passionate to you.
I give that answer an A-. All right, last question. If we could team up and solve one of the world's greatest challenges, what would that be, and where would we start?
Well, from my perspective, there are 2 very important things to do. The last thing that evolution needed to invent, biological evolution, was the neocortex. That's the point I make in my mind book. Because the neocortex is a unique part of the brain and a unique type of nervous system structure that it can think in a hierarchical manner, and it can build ideas on top of ideas. It can take a whole bunch of ideas in a pattern and call that an idea, and then it can use that idea with other ideas and create an idea on top of that. That elaborate hierarchy we call knowledge, and only mammals have a neocortex, and only humans have one that's big enough to have created things like art and music and science and technology. The last invention that humans need to make with our neocortex is an artificial neocortex, which is to say artificial intelligence, at a sufficiently profound level that it can then iteratively improve itself. We're going to merge with that because we're creating these as tools. But, I mean, that's actually been a passion of mine for 50 years. I got involved in artificial intelligence in 1960. That's only 4 years after the field got its name, because it got its name in the 1956 Dartmouth Conference. And I had the fortune of being mentored by Marvin Minsky, who's the father of artificial intelligence. And so I've worked in this field for 52 years. This book that's coming out actually reflects my thoughts about how the brain works and how to actually create that capability and break through some of the barriers. We have 300 million pattern recognizers in our brain. That sounds like a big number. It was big enough to do little things like art and science and music, but it's also quite limiting. We ultimately can expand that indefinitely. The reason we can't expand it, the big innovation in human beings is we have this big forehead to allow more neocortex. A greater quantity resulted in quality. We have somewhat greater quantity than the other primates, and that enabled us to do all of these grand creations. We're going to expand it further as we master its capabilities. So that's one grand challenge, because then that will expand our intelligence. And with greater intelligence, we can solve every other problem. Now, the other important problem is life extension. It's one thing we need to live long enough to get to this ability to create superintelligence. Because if we had the superintelligence, we would figure out life extension. But with life extension and a longer life, then we have time to create artificial intelligence. So I've had that interest as well. And there was significant reference, inspiring reference this evening to challenges and difficulties ending up representing opportunities to do things that have never been done before. And so I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes almost 30 years ago. And that ended up actually being a blessing, because I overcame that problem with my own ideas, and it gave me the meta idea that, wow, just like my family said, there is an idea to solve any problem. And here was a problem, and I was actually able to overcome it. Now, there are other health challenges. I have a version 1.0 biological body, and it's subject to other flaws. I had another challenge, middle age. So I've been interested in overcoming the challenges of our biological bodies. There are new technologies coming. We heard about biotech tonight and nanotech. And they're going to help us to extend human life. So that's another important challenge. And we're learning actually how biology works as an information science, and that's a whole new idea. So those are the two big problems I think that are worth solving.
That's good to work on.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.